Okay, welcome back. So this is likely an activity that you're going to want to play around with a little bit and get take some time to figure out what works and what doesn't. In the materials for the course itself, there is also a teacher key, which is one of many possible solutions that there can be, because there are multiple ways that you can put these things together. But the big takeaway from this should be the key ideas of thinking about what others need, not just moving forward. And this same idea that came up in that 100 numbers task about the good for all, you can, in several of those positions, you can make one square yourself, but the goal is to get everybody to make squares. And so it can work out to be a fun activity. But as I said, you're going to want to play around with it a little bit more yourself to get more comfortable with it. Anybody have one or two big key takeaways from this that you'd like to share with the group?
I guess sharing in a similar format. Towards the end of the year, teaching geometry, when we start doing compound shapes, I really love playing Tangeos with my geometry students as a little mental break for them. And it's funny because they start and they're like, this is dumb. And then after like 3 or 4 turns, they're like super competitive with it. So having some of these kind of activities is a good mental break for them, and they're still doing math with it. So it's really fun to kind of see them having to challenge it in a different way.
Right. And this one also, there's the idea that because there's so many triangles in there, is that they can make some small squares, but then what do they do with the big ones? So a lot of different thinking and reasoning processes. And yeah, when I first heard about this activity, Jen had done this activity before, or a similar one with circles, which it turns out is really hard to create virtually unless you have GeoGebra, which might make it easier. But that I was like, that's too simple an activity for high school students. And then I started playing around with it, and oh no, it really is a cool thing to get them really thinking about some neat stuff. So so Broken Squares is the brand new activity, and I hope that you'll find it useful for your kids. Of course, you can do this with paper pieces as well, where in which instead of the corners there, you would give them, say, an envelope or a paper clip with all their pieces, and then see what they can do with it. Okay. So that was lesson 4. So moving on to lesson 5 is, if at first you don't succeed, try again. So standard for mathematical practice number 1 says that you persist and you continue on. And so this one has a couple of different activities in it. It is the student's introduction to something called a 10-minute talk as well, which is, it has some resemblance to a number talk. It's a quick routine like a number talk is, but this time it really allows you to assess the depth of students' understanding of something. You can take a look at their responses, and if they're giving simple responses, it tells you one thing. If they're getting really creative with their responses, it tells you entirely something different. And all of these things, they're what we call low floor, high ceiling, where students can access them, maybe not at the level that you're hoping that they will be working, but they can certainly access them in some way. And then students, as I said, who have deep understanding can go a lot further. And so I'll just give you about 15 or 20 seconds to think about this one. Try to see how many different things that you can think of for this. How many ways can you represent 12? And this is an example of like the ultimate in low floor to high ceiling, because students could literally draw 12 dots, or they could come up with a calculus integral that has a definite value of 12. I mean, you could do anything along the way. And I'm catching up on a little bit of time from when I had the tech problem. I had thought to maybe have you annotate and share some of yours, but instead I'll just go with the ones that I have. And so these are just some things that students at various levels might come up with. And you can see for everything from elementary school into fairly complicated expressions and equations that they could use. I used this in a high school class one time where I just threw a quadratic equation out there and I said, what can you tell me about it? And I was absolutely stunned by what students came up with, the connections that they made that I hadn't even made with them yet. So it's a really neat opportunity for students to look at things different ways and for you to formatively assess how deep their understanding is. So it's a 10-minute talk is another instructional strategy we'll use throughout the course. The next thing that comes in this lesson is what we call the Noah's Ark task. And I just highlight it here because it's going to be your part of your lunchtime work. We're going to just ask you to take about 10 minutes to take a preview of this particular task. It's what we will come back to after lunch.